Alright, so you should be on 293. We are going to talk about George Washington today and how the government started to get set up and issues that had to be dealt with immediately. Okay, so we know that we're going to be talking about George Washington, so he is kind of what we'll focus on this whole chapter. And this first part is about him taking office, being our first president. Okay. Now back during this time, presidents were elected different than what they were. We did talk about that during the Constitution when we read that. What the deal was the Electoral College wrote down the names that they were choosing. Whoever came in first place was president. Whoever came in second place was the vice president. Okay? So the Electoral College, they wrote two names down, and the top vote getter obviously was George Washington, correct? What is so interesting about how he became president? This is the only president that happened this way. Caitlin?
He didn't want to be president?
Well, he didn't want to be president, you're right. How about another interesting fact? Ethan?
He was the first president?
He was the first one. What else? Interesting fact that no other president has had this. Alright. He is the only president to ever have been elected unanimously, meaning every single person voted for him. That has never happened since and probably will never happen again. Pure fact of how we vote today and how many people are in our country today. This is just not going to happen. Okay, so everybody voted for him. And in second place was our vice president, and who became the very first vice president? Courtney? Griebel? John Adams. Make sure you indent here if you notice that I have indented. John Adams is the vice president because he got the second place amount of votes. He'll actually become president later in about 8 years. He'll be our second president. So Washington has to leave his home, which is in Mount Vernon, not Iowa, Virginia, and he has to come to the Capitol to be inaugurated. And where's the Capitol at during this time period, Lucas?
New York.
It's in New York, so he has to leave Mount Vernon, get on his horse and buggy and pack all his goods. I think he leaves his wife to start with. And he heads to New York, so he is going to be inaugurated. And what does it mean to be inaugurated? Tristan?
Sworn in as president.
Sworn in as president. And when is he sworn in? What date does he get sworn in on, Emma?
April 30th.
Yep, go back out with your bullets. April 30th, he is inaugurated. Today, we don't do swearing in the inauguration in the April. When is the exact date of inauguration day today, Austin? January 20th. Last year, the students that went to D.C. went in January during the inauguration and watched President Obama be sworn in. The fifth graders, currently, when they're in 8th grade, they will go to the next inauguration. So it's at that time it was in New York, like I said. Today it's in Washington, D.C. in our capital. They hold it on the steps of the Capitol building outside, and people just line up the area outside all the way down, and it's very, very busy there.
Should that be spelled with a T?
Probably. Yes. What is it even? Inaugurated? No one noticed it all day until you. Yes, it's inaugurated. I spelled it wrong. Sorry. Thanks.
Good job.
Way to notice it. First one. Okay, so he was inaugurated, and if you flip to 294, we'll talk about what they decided to call him, because they didn't think it would be respectful to call him George or, Mr. Washington. They thought that the president should have some form of a title. And so they argued over this for like a month to figure out what they would call him. John Adams, as vice president, he threw out some options such as His Excellency or His Highness, but they didn't like those. Why not? Caleb?
Because his words of king.
Right, because they thought His Highness, His Excellency kind of made it sound like he was a king, and they were trying to get away from that. So after a month of debate, what did they end up with, Courtney Booth?
Mr. President.
Mr. President. When you're taking your notes, if that's a lot of things to write here, if you want to shorten it and just put Congress said Mr. President, that's fine, as long as you can understand it.
Wait, if we go to the White House, do you think we'll see the president?
Chances are very slim, but there's a chance.
So if you would say something to him, you'd be like,
You would
"Mr.
want to say Mr. President. If you ever meet the President, you will call him Mr. President when you shake his hand nice and firm. Nice to meet you, Mr. President.
Did you send that in already? Is that right?
We'll find out, yeah. And they don't send it back to us until like 2 to 3 weeks before you leave. That's just because they're not nice about that. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so they're going to call him Miss President. If there's ever a female elected, I imagine it'll be Madam President, actually, not Mrs. I think it'd be Madam President, most likely, because people that are in other positions, they put the Madam in front of it, so it would be Madam President. Okay, if you're on 294, we're going to talk about the court system. In the Constitution, Article 3 was the judicial branch, which talked all about the Supreme Court. Okay. The writers of the Constitution created the Supreme Court, but they left pretty much everything else about it up to the Congress. They did say there would be judges on the Supreme Court, or justices. They gave qualifications and terms and things like that, but they didn't set it up, really. All right. So now Congress has to decide how the Supreme Court is going to look, the number of justices, a justice is the judge, how much power they should have. They disagreed on that because some thought it should be more powerful, some thought it shouldn't because the states have their own courts, and how would you distinguish between state and federal courts? It was a big, disagreement, and they finally figured things out. And they came up with a law that pretty much this law said what the Supreme Court would look like. And what was the name of this law that they passed, Caitlin?
Federal Judiciary Act.
Yeah, the Federal Judiciary Act of 1789, because they passed it in 1789. And basically what this act said was, this is what the Supreme Court will look like. This is how many members it'll be, and this is what they'll look like. Okay? So how many people would be on the Supreme Court, Ruby? It'd be six-member Supreme Court. Now today there's not 6 members on the Supreme Court, there's more. How many? Anyone know how many are on today's Supreme Court? It's not many more, but there's more. Tristan? 9. There are 9 members of the Supreme Court. And when you break it down, you've got basically the leader and the rest. What do they call the top dog of the Supreme Court, Andrew?
Justices.
What?
Isn't it the head justice?
Not the head justice. Dallas?
Oh, the. I just thought. Chief Justice.
Chief Justice. Chief Justice is, your leader. And if you remember in the Constitution, how do you get to become a justice? Does anyone remember from the Constitution? Are you voted in? Are you picked? How does that work? Does anyone remember how you get to become a justice or a judge? Dallas?
Aren't you appointed?
You are appointed. Who appoints you? What?
The president.
The president. The president appoints the justices, okay? The president appoints it. Now remember, because we have a good system of checks and balances, Congress can override that if they want by a certain amount of votes. So you've got the Chief Justice, and who did George Washington appoint to be the very first Chief Justice of our Supreme Court? Sam? John Jay. Very prominent lawyer from New York. So you've got the Chief Justice, and then you obviously have 5 other Associate Justices. This picture is today's Supreme Court, 9. If you can notice, there are 2 women on the Supreme Court, and there is an African American. Now, for Supreme Court, how long can you serve? How long is your term? Lucas.
Oh, it's a life term.
Life term. So you can serve until you're either impeached and convicted, resign, retire, or die. Many people have died while in office. Okay. So if you're president ever, chances of you appointing a Supreme Court justice could be slim. If, you might serve for 8 years and none of these people leave because no one resigns, so there's chances that you might. If there's an opening while you're president, it's a good thing for your political party, because if you're the president, you're going to appoint somebody that has similar beliefs as you.
Which one is the Chief Justice?
I think dude in the middle.
He looks kind
This one?
I think the guy over there.
The rest of them don't.
I thought there was only, when I worked at, I thought there was only 8 up there. So I guess,
He blend in.
yeah, I couldn't see him. I thought
It's a dark picture.
Oh my gosh.
he.
Okay, so that's your court system and how that would look. Okay, let's take a look at the cabinet. Now, the Constitution also left this up to Congress, setting up the cabinet. All right, coming up with departments that would actually help the president kind of lead the nation or advise the president on certain things that he had to, the issues and problems he had to face. So there are 4 members at this time in his cabinet. Remember, today we have 15, and we'll look at that list a little later. What I want you to do is I want you to list these 4 down right now, and then we're going to come up together. Someone's going to come up and write down the correct person that would go with it. You've got the Secretary of War, State, and if you don't want to put Secretary in front of each one because you know, just put little ditto marks. You guys know how to do ditto marks?
No, they don't work.
Yeah, it's not
Wait,
like
what?
little things.
Ditto.
I can see that.
I can't see ditto.
That's Caleb that said that. Don't help me.
Okay, ditto marks look like that's a ditto mark. It means this, like if I put that underneath secretary, it means I'm putting secretary there, and then I'll just put Secretary of State, ditto. So when I read it later, that way I don't have to write as much. So when you're taking notes and stuff, doing that helps out. What?
Nothing.
But if you're typing, sometimes it's quicker. So erase all strokes. Okay, so Secretary of War. Write down our Secretary of War. Secretary of War, his job would be to be the head of the Department of War and help lead the nation and advise the president on our nation's defense issues.
Is this?
Do I like write it like
No,
with my finger?
yeah, right with your finger. This is back then, George
Oh.
Washington's cabinet.
Wait, did I spell that right?
No, but you're not the only one that spelled Henry like that today.
I think I spelled.
He spelled 9ch, yeah, he did.
Oh, I forgot that.
It's okay, but I've 2 times today someone spelled Henry like that. It's odd.
Oh,
There's no E in it, but that's okay. Henry Knox is the Secretary of War, so he had a department that was in charge of that. Secretary of State. Tell us who that is. Write that down when you're ready for that. Secretary of State is the person that would be in charge of the relations between the U.S. and other countries. Okay, and so this person had very good background in this. He was over in France for a while, quite a bit, working as a diplomat, and wrote the Declaration of Independence. Will be the 3rd president of the country. Wrong page. Go back where it says Washington's cabinet. You got it right there, Dylan. Okay. Wrote the Declaration of Independence. Does that help you?
It should.
3rd president. Got it. Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State. Thomas J. E.
Yeah, just put that.
Perfect. Thomas J. Tristan, tell us the Secretary of Treasury. This person would be in charge of the nation's money and finances and trying to manage the government's money, coming up with a plan to improve our economy. Alexander Hamilton. And let's see, Emma, you've got Attorney General. This person would advise the country on all legal issues. Edmund Randolph is the Attorney General during this time. And again, the President appoints these guys as well, or ladies. There are ladies. Okay, so this is your George Washington's cabinet. Now, remember, President Obama has 15. Now, anytime he wants to get advised on something, you don't bring them all in. I mean, it doesn't make sense to bring the Secretary of Treasury if they're talking about something that, agriculture, they don't need to bring them all in together. At times, all of them will be together in a room, but very little time will they be. So I want to show you, if you want to look back at your, list of cabinet people that you came up with, let's see. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Here's the list. Today, there's 15. These people are the people that are the lead heads of them. Secretary of State still, which is relations with other countries. Treasury, again, which is your money. Defense, they just changed the Secretary of War. Instead of it being the War Department, it's now the Defense Department. So if you put War, that's okay. Defense is the same thing. Attorney General still. We have the Secretary of Interior dealing with things within the country. Secretary of Agriculture. There's a lot of things going on, especially in the Midwest, that we would need something like this. Tom Vilsack, that's the Secretary of Agriculture. He is from Iowa. Secretary of Commerce, which has to do with trade. Labor, working, things like that. Health and Human Services housing and urban development, transportation, energy, education, veterans affairs, and the most recent position that has been added is Secretary of Homeland Security with all the terrorism and things like that. That is something that is a newer position. Yeah. So, I mean, you might have come up with the wrong name, but kind of been on the right line. It's okay. These are all the things that we deal with, and the president needs advice on, so they're different departments. All right? Okay. Back at it. Okay, so make sure you're on page 295. We're going to talk about Alexander Hamilton for a little bit. He's Secretary of Treasury. His position was quite important at the beginning here. Well, and it's always going to be important, whoever is Secretary of Treasury, because we have such a wonderful debt. Let's see if this page is going to turn. Here we go. All right, economic problems. So, the United States, prior to the Constitution being written, just finished up being in a war. And so, obviously, when you're in a war, you're going to have a little bit of a debt. You need to get that paid off. And so, in 1789, what was the country's debt? Ruby?
$52 million.
Yeah, $52 million.
I have a question. With the war debt, it's like for all the guns, weapons, the paying of people, and do they have to pay for destruction of property or something like that if they destroy?
Well, if it's within our own country,
Oh,
and since it was,
yeah.
yeah, but that would come from a different debt, because the war debt is money we borrowed for the war. Then when we need to borrow money to fix it up, reconstruct, that would be add on to a different debt. Anyone know the debt today?
They're still paying it?
Well, we have a debt. I mean, we've been in many wars since, and we just finished a war. So what's the debt today? Do you know?
Over $1 billion.
Oh yeah, well over that.
62 billion.
Way, way off. Ethan?
Isn't it like 7 trillion?
$18 trillion.
Are you really?
I can't even picture that amount of money. Wasn't that off? I can't even picture $18 trillion. Huh? Can they do print? Oh, good question. Hey, shh. Lucas just asked, very good question, and a lot of people ask this question quite a bit. Can't you just print money? When you print money, it's inflation, and it would make the debt go even higher. Because it costs to print. Everything you do costs, so it costs to print money. Ruby, you gotta raise your hand. What? And I'm not gonna answer.
Money, to help them and stuff, when we still have our own debts.
Good question, too. In your budget, you've got certain stuff goes everywhere. We have certain parts that go and help people here. We have certain parts that go and help other countries. And the reason we help other countries is to protect ourselves. So one of the most highest countries on our list of help is Colombia. We give a lot of money to Colombia. And that reason to help them, because their country struggles a lot with civil wars, and the main reason for that is their illegal growing of cocaine, the plant that makes cocaine, and then bringing it to us. Well, the reason we want to help them is to stop that growth of cocaine and things so that it doesn't come into our country and start affecting us, which it does negatively affect us, because you bring cocaine on the streets, it affects people's health, and it affects crime. Okay? And again, with terrorists too, the reason we help in the Middle East is because we don't want those terrorist groups to continue to form. Otherwise, they're going to come over and boom, bam, us. Caitlin?
Wouldn't making more money make everything more expensive?
Making more money makes everything more expensive. So that's a bad idea. If you have the same question you were going to ask a few seconds ago, I'm not going to answer it. Okay. All right. Oh, gosh. Yeah.
So it's more
Go ahead.
over the summer I caught 2 girls doing meth, and then later on that day I caught a guy doing cocaine, and then
You need to start hanging out in different places.
Actually, I'm pretty sure Lucas was there.
Then he needs to start hanging out in different places.
Those,
All right. Okay, that's enough. Boys. Noah, that's enough. You boys need it. It's not a funny thing. Okay. All right.
It wasn't right in front of my house. It was up at the desk.
All right, so you've got this debt, and we borrowed a lot. Face the front. We borrowed a lot of our money from other countries during the war. Who are some countries we borrowed the money from? Who we borrow from? Ruby?
Spain was one.
Spain was one. Courtney?
Netherlands.
Netherlands, France. Those are some countries. But we also borrowed money from who else? Caleb? Not necessarily other countries.
Is it like people that, like private people from our country?
Our own citizens, merchants, business owners, private citizens that were wealthy. We borrowed. Thomas Jefferson comes over and kind of comes up with an idea, and they came up with a compromise. And the people of the South said, "Okay, we'll help you pay off the debt if you agree to put the new capital," because they were going to be building a new capital city. If you agree to put the new capital city in the South, what's considered the South, okay? And so they decided, okay, we can do that. We can agree upon that. So they chose the new capital, and the site would be on the Potomac River between Virginia and Maryland. What's the new capital city going to be? Washington, D.C. So there we go. We've got that. They agreed with that. Second thing they said was we need to raise government revenue. What's revenue? What is revenue, Caleb?
Money.
Like your money, your income. And they needed to do this. And how did they say they would be raising revenue? How can you raise revenue? Taxes. They're going to pay. They were going to put a tax on imported goods. Any goods that were imported within the country, because if they did that, they would get income. Plus, it would encourage the growth of American industry, which is more income. All right, and then the last one we said was creating a national bank. Okay, having a national bank, lots of things come from this. It's a safe place to keep the money. The government can have a safe place to keep their money. And also, what else do banks do? Provide. Ethan? Loans. They can give you loans. They can loan money to people, businesses, government. And then when you pay that back, you pay an interest, and boom, you got money. Yes?
Did we ever get out of it?
Yes and no. I mean, we've paid that part of the debt back, but we're now in a different debt, so technically I would say no because we're in a debt of $18 trillion.
No, I'm pretty sure.
How long do you think it's going to take to pay all that off?
Oh, it's going to take a long time. No. Well, it'll never be paid off in my time. Okay, tomorrow we're going to talk about is how a couple guys did not like the idea of having this bank. All right, so we will talk about that tomorrow. Now, listen carefully. Shh. Don't leave.